Breaking news. Iran says it retaliated against U.S. forces in Iraq and Qatar.
Defeating news. Iran has unleashed a ballistic missile attack upon a U.S. military base in Qatar, following the aggressive launching of numerous ballistic missiles by the U.S. towards Iran over the weekend.
Tensions between the United States and Iran had been simmering for years, but they reached a boiling point in early 2025. The diplomatic channels that once offered a path to de-escalation had all but closed. The collapse of past nuclear agreements left a void filled with suspicion and military posturing. In the weeks leading up to the attack, a shadow war between Iran and Israel intensified dramatically. This conflict, marked by targeted strikes and covert operations, created a highly volatile environment across the Middle East. Israel's strikes on sensitive sites in Tehran, including the notorious Evin prison, signaled that the old rules of engagement were no longer in effect. The situation was a powder keg just waiting for a spark. The international community watched with growing alarm as the rhetoric from Washington and Tehran grew more aggressive. U.S. President Donald Trump's administration adopted a hardline stance, viewing Iran's advancing nuclear program as an unacceptable threat to global security. Officials in Washington repeatedly stated that all options were on the table to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. Meanwhile, Iran's leadership, under Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, insisted its nuclear ambitions were peaceful. They refused to bow to American pressure, accelerating uranium enrichment in defiance of international warnings. This cycle of escalation created a dangerous momentum, making a direct military confrontation seem not just possible, but increasingly inevitable. The immediate trigger for the U.S. military action was a series of intelligence reports suggesting Iran was on the verge of a nuclear breakout. These reports, shared with key allies like the United Kingdom and Israel, painted a picture of an Iranian leadership determined to cross a red line. The ongoing conflict between Iran and Israel provided a window of opportunity for the United States to act. Washington framed its impending operation as a necessary preventive measure designed to neutralize an imminent threat before it could materialize. The decision was made in the highest circles of power, with President Trump, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and Joint Chiefs Chairman Dan Kane authorizing the strike. This period was marked by a failure of diplomacy. Efforts by the United Nations and European powers to mediate the crisis proved fruitless. Each side viewed the other's actions as provocations, deepening the mistrust that had defined their relationship for decades. The world was witnessing a classic security dilemma where the defensive measures taken by one nation were perceived as offensive threats by another. This dynamic pushed both the United States and Iran further down a path of confrontation. By June 22, 2025, the stage was set for a military operation that would reshape the political landscape of the Middle East and send shockwaves around the globe. The American military assault, codenamed Operation Midnight Hammer, began on the evening of June 22, 2025. It was a meticulously planned and executed operation involving a massive deployment of air and sea power. Over 125 U.S. aircraft participated, including advanced B-2 Spirit stealth bombers that embarked on a long-range mission from their base near Kansas City, Missouri. These bombers were tasked with striking Iran's most heavily fortified nuclear facilities. The operation was designed to overwhelm Iranian air defenses through a combination of stealth technology, electronic warfare, and coordinated multi-pronged attacks. The goal was to deliver a decisive blow to the heart of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. The first wave of attacks targeted the Nuclear Research Center in Isfahan. At around 5 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S. submarines positioned in the Persian Gulf launched more than 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles. These precision-guided weapons flew low to evade radar, striking their targets with devastating accuracy. A little over an hour later, the B-2 bombers reached their primary targets, the deep-buried enrichment facilities at Fordow and Natanz. Between 6:40 and 7:05 p.m., the bombers dropped 14 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, powerful bunker-buster bombs designed specifically to destroy hardened underground structures. The strikes were a demonstration of America's formidable military reach and technological superiority. The attack plan relied heavily on deception to minimize risks to U.S. forces. decoy flights were used to misdirect and confuse Iranian air defense operators, drawing their attention away from the real attack corridors. The stealth capabilities of the B-2 bombers allowed them to penetrate deep into Iranian airspace undetected, deliver their payloads, and return to base without incident. The entire operation was a complex symphony of military logistics and advanced technology, coordinated in real time from command centers thousands of miles away. The precision of the strikes was intended to limit collateral damage while maximizing the impact on the targeted nuclear sites. Initial damage assessments came quickly. Satellite imagery released in the hours after the attack showed massive craters at the Fordow site and widespread destruction at the above-ground facilities in Natanz and Isfahan. The United Nations nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, confirmed that all three sites had sustained significant damage, though the full extent of the destruction at the underground Fordow facility remained uncertain. Crucially, the IAEA also reported that no significant radiation leaks had been detected, alleviating one of the most immediate fears. However, experts cautioned that while the strikes had dealt a major setback, Iran's nuclear program was far from destroyed, with stocks of enriched uranium likely secured elsewhere. Iran's response was swift and forceful. On June 23, less than 24 hours after the American assault, Iran launched a barrage of ballistic missiles targeting U.S. military bases in Qatar and Iraq. The retaliatory strikes signaled that Tehran would not absorb the attack without responding, escalating the conflict from a one-sided strike to a direct military exchange. U.S. forces across the region, including in Kuwait, Bahrain, and the UAE, were placed on the highest alert level. The Middle East was now on a war footing, with the terrifying prospect of a full-scale conflict looming larger than ever. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, condemned the U.S. strikes as a blatant violation of international law and vowed that his country would respond at a time and place of our choosing. The world reacted with a mixture of support, condemnation, and alarm. Key U.S. allies, including the United Kingdom and Israel, publicly backed the operation. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised the strike as a bold and necessary action to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran. In Washington, President Trump hailed the operation as a spectacular success, framing it as a defensive measure to protect American interests and global security. However, this view was not universally shared. Major world powers like Russia and China immediately condemned the unilateral U.S. action. Russia called it an irresponsible violation of the UN Charter and reaffirmed its support for Iran's right to self-defense. The strikes also created deep divisions within the United States. The operation was lauded by many Republicans in Congress, with figures like House Speaker Mike Johnson praising the president's decisive leadership. However, many Democrats voiced strong opposition, criticizing the administration for bypassing Congress and launching a major military attack without proper authorization. Representative Jim Himes, a prominent Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, questioned the legality and strategic wisdom of the strikes, warning of a potential quagmire. This political polarization underscored the deep disagreements within American society about the country's role in the world and the use of military force. International organizations pleaded for restraint. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres described the situation as a dangerous escalation and called on all parties to step back from the brink of a wider war. European Union members, while concerned about Iran's nuclear program, largely criticized the U.S. for abandoning diplomacy in favor of military force. France specifically condemned an earlier Israeli strike on Evin prison, highlighting the complex web of actions that led to the crisis. The global reaction was fragmented, reflecting a world order struggling to cope with renewed great power competition and the erosion of established international norms. The path forward was now dangerously unclear. The long-term consequences of Operation Midnight Hammer are profound and will shape global politics for years to come. The most immediate effect is on Iran's nuclear program. While the strikes have undoubtedly set back its capabilities, they may not have ended its ambitions. Many analysts believe the attack could have the perverse effect of strengthening the resolve of Iran's hardliners, pushing them to pursue a nuclear weapon in secret with even greater determination. The destruction of its declared facilities might simply drive the program deeper underground, making it harder for international inspectors to monitor. The strikes have exchanged a known, observable program for a potentially hidden and more dangerous one. Diplomacy has been dealt a severe blow. The prospects for negotiating a new nuclear deal, already slim before the strikes, now seem almost non-existent. The attack has shattered any remaining trust between Washington and Tehran, making direct talks unthinkable in the near future. U.S.-Iran relations are now at their lowest point since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. This diplomatic vacuum raises the risk of miscalculation on both sides. Without open channels of communication, any future incident in the Persian Gulf or elsewhere in the region could quickly spiral out of control, leading to a much broader and more devastating conflict that neither side may truly want. The risk of a regional war has increased exponentially. The direct exchange of fire between the U.S. and Iran has set a new and dangerous precedent. This could embolden proxy forces across the Middle East, from Iraq and Syria to Lebanon and Yemen, to escalate their own conflicts. The entire region is now a tinderbox, and the initial U.S. and Iranian strikes could be the opening salvos of a prolonged and bloody war fought on multiple fronts. The economic consequences are also significant. Oil prices spiked immediately after the news broke, and while they later stabilized, the fear of a potential closure of the Strait of Hormuz, a vital artery for global energy supplies, continues to rattle markets. Ultimately, the future remains deeply uncertain. The U.S. airstrikes have opened a new and volatile chapter in the Middle East. The path ahead could lead to a devastating regional war, dragging in other countries and causing immense human suffering. Alternatively, the shock of this direct confrontation could, after a period of high tension, force all sides to recognize the catastrophic costs of further escalation and cautiously return to the negotiating table. The world now watches and waits, hoping that diplomacy can be resurrected from the ashes of this conflict. Both war and a fragile peace remain possibilities on the horizon. The choices made in the coming weeks by leaders in Washington, Tehran, and other world capitals will determine which path is taken.
The U.S. airstrikes on Iran, a turning point in Middle Eastern tensions. June 2025. On June 22, 2025, the United States executed a powerful and highly coordinated military operation targeting Iran's nuclear infrastructure. The operation, dubbed Midnight Hammer, involved the deployment of stealth bombers and cruise missiles aimed at crippling Iran's uranium enrichment capabilities. This moment marks a significant escalation in the already tense relations between Iran and the West, particularly against the backdrop of Israel's ongoing covert actions and the broader strategic standoff in the region. Background and build-up tensions have been mounting throughout 2025 due to a series of events involving Iranian-backed militia actions, Israeli airstrikes, and escalating rhetoric around Iran's nuclear program. Iran had continued enriching uranium beyond limits set by the now-defunct JCPOA Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, raising alarm in Washington and Jerusalem. In early June, Israeli airstrikes reportedly targeted missile storage sites in Iranian proxy infrastructure. In response, Iran warned of a broader retaliation and hinted at advancing its nuclear development underground, especially at highly fortified locations like Fordo and Natanz. The operation in the early hours of June 22nd, U.S. B-2 stealth bombers flew into Iranian airspace and detected and dropped 14 GBU-57 MOT massive ordnance penetrator bombs on deep-buried nuclear sites. These 30,000-pound bombs were used for the first time in combat, specifically chosen for their ability to destroy heavily fortified underground facilities. Simultaneously, over 20 Tomahawk cruise missiles were launched from a U.S. submarine in the Persian Gulf, striking the Isfahan Nuclear Research Center and other strategic locations. The precision and coordination of the attack stunned analysts and Iran's air defense forces, many of whom were misdirected by decoy flights and stealth tactics. Impact and immediate response initial satellite imagery showed extensive cratering at Fordo, with major infrastructure reportedly obliterated at Natanz and Isfahan. However, Iranian officials claimed that most of the sensitive nuclear material had been relocated beforehand and that damage was limited and superficial. The IAEA later confirmed no significant radiation retaliation leaks occurred, easing fears of environmental fallout. Politically, U.S. President Donald Trump hailed the operation as a spectacular success, while warning Tehran against retaliation. He stated that the strikes were a necessary measure to halt Iran's nuclear threat and reaffirm U.S. strength in the region. Meanwhile, Iran vowed to respond at a time and place of our choosing. By June 23rd, Iran had launched missile strikes against U.S. military facilities in Qatar, marking a sharp escalation and raising the risk of a broader regional war.